Sarah Pearson stood in the doorway of her son's bedroom, now stripped bare of the posters, sports equipment, and scattered textbooks that had defined it for the past 18 years. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, illuminating the faded patches on the walls where memories once hung. Outside, the maple trees that lined her suburban Boston neighborhood were just beginning to show hints of autumn gold. "Mom, you're doing it again," came a voice from behind her. Sarah turned to find her son, Ethan, carrying the last box toward the front door. At 22, he'd grown into a man she barely recognized sometimes, tall, confident, with her own determined chin and his father's thoughtful eyes. "Doing what?" she asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "That thing where you stare into my empty room like you're shooting a dramatic scene in a movie." Ethan set the box down and gave her a sideways hug. "It's just grad school, Mom." "Providence is barely an hour away," Sarah sighed, leaning into the embrace. "I know. It's just—" She gestured vaguely at the 4-bedroom colonial house around them, the house they'd bought when Ethan was 5, when her career as an architectural consultant was taking off, when her ex-husband Mark still lived with them. "It feels ridiculous now, all this space just for me." Ethan pulled away and hoisted the box again. "Why don't you rent out a room? You know, supplemental income plus some company. Jared's mom did it after his dad moved out, and she said it saved her sanity." Sarah followed him out to his packed Honda Civic. "Your father's alimony checks are perfectly adequate, thank you very much." She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. The divorce 3 years ago had been amicable enough, but Mark's swift remarriage to a woman 15 years younger still stung. "It's not about the money, Mom. It's about—" Ethan shoved the final box into his trunk and slammed it shut. "I worry about you rattling around in that big house alone." "I'm 52, not 82, Sarah countered, crossing her arms. Ethan checked his watch. "I should get going if I want to beat traffic. Think about it, okay? Even just one room. You'd be surprised how much you might like having someone new around." After final hugs and promises to call, Sarah watched her son's car disappear down Maple Street. She turned back to face her house, beautiful, spacious, and overwhelmingly empty. That evening, Sarah wandered from room to room with a glass of Pinot Noir, seeing her home with new eyes. The formal dining room they used maybe twice a year. The guest bedroom that hadn't seen a guest since her sister visited last Christmas. Ethan's room. The finished basement with the entertainment center Mark had insisted on installing before deciding suburban life wasn't for him after all. She paused at the sliding glass doors that led to the backyard. Beyond the well-maintained lawn and flower beds, she tended meticulously stood her pride and joy, a garden studio she'd designed herself after the divorce. Originally intended as a home office, the 400-square-foot space, with its wall of windows facing the small woodland behind their property, had become her sanctuary. Inside was her drafting table, comfortable reading chair, compact bathroom, and the expensive espresso machine she'd bought herself as a divorce present. Sarah took a sip of wine, a plan slowly forming in her mind. She pulled out her laptop and began to research. By midnight, she had pages of notes, rental rates for comparable properties in her area, and a growing sense of excitement she hadn't felt in months. The next morning, she called her friend Diane, a real estate agent. "You want to do what?" Diane asked incredulously, after Sarah explained her idea. "Rent out the main house and move into my studio," Sarah repeated. "It's perfectly set up already. I just need to add a kitchenette, which won't be hard. The studio has separate access from the side gate, so I'll still have privacy." "But why not just rent out a room like Ethan suggested?" Sarah walked over to her studio while they talked, feeling the morning dew soak through her slippers. "Because I don't want strangers in my space. This way, I get income from the entire house, and I get to keep the best part for myself, my studio with that view of the woods I love. Plus, it'll be like a trial run for downsizing eventually." There was silence on the other end of the line. "You know what? It's actually brilliant. Unconventional, but brilliant. Those 4 bedrooms could bring in serious rental income, especially if you target young professionals or grad students. By the end of the week, Sarah had contacted contractors about the kitchenette installation and started packing up personal items from the main house. She took only what she truly needed or loved: her grandmother's quilt, her favorite books, the art she'd collected over years of travel. The rest went into storage or was donated. When Ethan called for their weekly check-in, she casually mentioned her plan. "You're doing what?" His voice rose in pitch, reminding her of his teenage years. "I'm renting out the house," she repeated calmly. "The whole thing. I'm moving into my studio." "Mom, that's not what I meant. I was thinking one room, maybe to a nice retired teacher or something." Sarah laughed. "Well, your suggestion sparked something better. The studio is all I need, really. And financially, it makes more sense to rent the entire house. But the studio is tiny. Where will you sleep? What about when I come visit? I've ordered a sleeper sofa, and I'm putting in a kitchenette. It'll be like a high-end tiny house. And when you visit, you can either stay in the studio with me, or if the tenants are amenable, we can arrange for you to use one of the bedrooms for a night or two." The silence told her Ethan was processing. Finally, he said, "Actually, that sounds kind of awesome. Like you're reclaiming your space on your own terms." "Exactly." Sarah smiled, pleased he understood. Sometimes the best solutions aren't the obvious ones. After they hung up, Sarah stood in her studio as the afternoon light filtered through the trees. The contractors would start next week. The rental listing would go live the week after that. For the first time since the divorce, perhaps even before it, she felt like she was writing her own story, not just responding to the plots others had created for her life. She'd taken her son's suggestion and transformed it into something entirely her own. The house would soon be filled with new life and energy, while she carved out exactly the space she wanted. Not too big, not too small. Not defined by being someone's mother or ex-wife, just hers. Sarah smiled, already imagining mornings with coffee by the window, watching deer wander through the woods. Ethan had meant well with his suggestion, but he'd underestimated her. They all had, including herself, until now. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Sarah stood in her studio, now barely recognizable from the quiet workspace it had been. The contractors had finished 2 days ahead of schedule, transforming the garden building into a fully functional tiny home. "What do you think?" asked Miguel, the lead contractor, as he wiped his hands on a rag. "Pretty impressive for such a small space, right?" Sarah turned slowly, taking it all in. The kitchenette gleamed with compact stainless steel appliances, a 2-burner induction cooktop, a combination microwave convection oven, and a refrigerator that somehow managed to look sleek despite its diminutive size. Custom cabinets in a soft sage green extended to the ceiling, maximizing every inch of storage space. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the quartz countertop. "Absolutely perfect." On the opposite end, her drafting table remained by the large windows, but now shared space with a navy blue sleeper sofa that would serve as her bed. Between them, a cleverly designed coffee table contained hidden storage and could expand into a dining surface. The bathroom had been updated with a rainfall showerhead and better lighting, making the small space feel like a luxury hotel. "The tankless water heater is all set," Miguel continued, pointing to a discreet panel. "And we upgraded the insulation throughout. You'll be comfortable year-round." After the contractors left, Sarah unpacked the last of her carefully curated belongings. She'd been ruthless in deciding what would come with her to the studio, only items that were functional, beautiful, or deeply meaningful made the cut. Everything else had been sold, donated, or placed in storage. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. 3 applications already. When can you review them?" The rental listing for the main house had gone live yesterday. Sarah had spent days preparing, photographing each room in the best light, writing a description that emphasized the home's charm and convenience to Boston's universities and hospitals. The rent she was asking was substantial, enough to cover her mortgage with plenty left over, but still competitive for a fully furnished 4-bedroom in this desirable neighborhood. That evening, Sarah met Diane at a wine bar downtown to review the applications. "This is exciting," Diane said, sliding a tablet across the table. "I've narrowed it down to these four, all with excellent credit and references." Sarah sipped her Chardonnay and scrolled through the profiles. A surgical resident at Mass General, 2 software engineers who work remotely, and a visiting professor from Sweden with his family. She looked up at Diane. "They all seem great. How do I choose?" Diane leaned forward. "The professor, Anders Nilsson, can only commit to 10 months, the length of his visiting position at MIT. The others are looking for at least a year. The surgical resident, Dr. Chen, works crazy hours, so she'd barely be home. The software engineers are a couple, Jessie and Raj. They're offering to pay 3 months up front." Sarah studied the applications more carefully. "I think I'm leaning toward the engineers. They seem established, and I like that they work from home. Less chance of the place sitting empty for days." "Good choice," Diane nodded. "They've already passed the background check, and their previous landlord raved about them, said they treated the place like it was their own." By the time Sarah walked home, the decision was made. She'd meet with Jessie and Raj tomorrow for a final showing, and if all went well, they could move in next week. The following afternoon, Sarah waited nervously on the front porch of what was still technically her home. A silver Prius pulled into the driveway, and a young couple emerged. The woman with a mass of curly hair pulled into a messy bun, the man tall and lanky, with a neatly trimmed beard. "You must be Sarah," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Jessie, and this is my husband, Raj. Your home is even more beautiful in person." Sarah gave them the tour, watching their reactions carefully. They asked intelligent questions about the heating system and internet setup. When they reached the kitchen, Raj ran his hand appreciatively over the 6-burner gas range. "I love to cook," he explained. "This kitchen is a dream." "We've been apartment hopping for years," Jessie added. "Always dreaming of a real home, but not ready to buy with the market so crazy." As they walked through the dining room, Sarah caught sight of her studio through the windows. From this angle, with the afternoon light hitting it just right, it looked like a jewel box nestled among the trees. "What's that building in the back?" Raj asked, following her gaze. Sarah hesitated. This was the moment she'd been preparing for. "That's my studio apartment. It has separate access from the side gate. I'll be living there." The couple exchanged glances. "So you'll be on the property?" Jessie asked carefully. "Yes, but completely separate from the main house," Sarah assured them. "You'll have total privacy. I designed it as my workspace before deciding to rent out the house. It's self-contained with its own utilities." There was a moment of silence before Raj broke into a grin. "That's actually perfect. We were a little nervous about being responsible for such a beautiful house. Knowing the owner is nearby, but not too nearby, is reassuring." Relief washed over Sarah. "I promise I won't be checking if you're separating your recycling properly," she joked. "The house is yours to enjoy. I just get to keep my little corner of the garden." By the time they left, the deal was all but done. Sarah watched them drive away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Was she really going through with this? Renting out her family home to strangers while she moved into what amounted to a glorified garden shed. That night, in what would be her last week sleeping in her bedroom, Sarah lay awake listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of the house. Change was coming, change she had chosen, yet it still felt momentous. Her phone lit up with a text from Ethan. "Did you meet the renters? Are they serial killers?" Sarah smiled and typed back, "They're lovely. Software engineers who work from home. Moving in next Saturday." 3 dots appeared as Ethan typed. "So it's really happening. You're moving into your tiny house. Can I still come home for Thanksgiving?" Sarah paused, considering how to respond. Finally she wrote, "Yes, it's happening. And this will always be your home. We'll figure out the holidays. Maybe by then you'll love my tiny house as much as I do." The week flew by in a flurry of final preparations. Sarah moved the last of her clothes to the studio, stocked her new kitchen with essentials, and prepared a welcome basket for Jessie and Raj with local coffee, a bottle of wine, and a guide to the neighborhood. On moving day, Sarah sat on the small deck outside her studio, watching as Jessie and Raj unloaded their belongings into what was now their home. The strange feeling she'd expected, jealousy perhaps or regret, never materialized. Instead, she felt a surprising lightness. That evening, after Jessie and Raj had finished the bulk of their unpacking, they invited Sarah over for a toast. Standing in her former kitchen, now filled with their cookbooks and colorful utensils, Sarah raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to making space for exactly what we need." As she walked back to her studio in the gathering dusk, the lights of the main house glowed warmly behind her. Ahead, her own smaller light beckoned. Sarah realized she wasn't leaving home. She was finally coming home to herself. The first month of Sarah's new living arrangement passed in a blur of adjustments, both expected and surprising. She woke one morning to the soft patter of October rain against her studio windows, momentarily disoriented before remembering this compact space was now home. Outside, the maple trees had fully surrendered to autumn, their brilliant red and gold leaves creating a natural privacy screen between her studio and the main house. Sarah stretched on the sleeper sofa she'd grown surprisingly fond of. 6 weeks ago, if someone had told her she'd be living in 400 square feet while renting out her family home, she would have laughed. Yet here she was, and the strangest part was how right it felt. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessie. "The heating system is making a weird clicking sound. Nothing urgent, but wanted to let you know." This was the 4th text this week. While Jessie and Raj were model tenants in many ways, quiet, clean, prompt with rent, they seemed determined to keep Sarah updated on every minor development in the house. A squeaky cabinet hinge, a flickering porch light, the mailman delivering a package meant for the previous house number. "I'll come check it out this afternoon," Sarah replied, then added, "Just heading out for a client meeting, so it might be around 3 p.m. The white lie gave her some breathing room. She discovered that healthy boundaries required gentle enforcement. After showering in her compact but luxurious bathroom, Sarah made espresso and carried it to her desk by the window. Rain droplets clung to the glass, transforming the woodland view into an impressionist painting. This morning ritual, coffee at her desk, watching the woods wake up, had become sacred. In the main house, she'd often rushed through breakfast, distracted by the mental list of rooms to clean and maintenance to schedule. Here, with minimal space to maintain, she found herself more present. Her phone rang, Ethan's weekly call. "Hey, honey," she answered, settling into her reading chair. "How's the program going?" "Intense," he replied, sounding tired but animated. "Professor Harrington is a genius, but her standards are impossible. How's tiny house life? Are you climbing the walls yet?" Sarah laughed. "Actually, I'm loving it. It's like being on a permanent retreat. Everything has its place, and I only kept things that matter." "And the renters? Still working out?" Sarah hesitated. "They're great, really, respectful, quiet. They're just very communicative." Meaning they text about every little thing. "I think they're nervous about living in someone else's home. I'm trying to encourage a little more independence without seeming neglectful." Ethan chuckled. "So you've gone from empty nester to reluctant landlord/house mother. Speaking of which, I was thinking of coming home next weekend. Would that be weird now?" The question Sarah had been dreading. "Of course not. You can stay with me in the studio. The sleeper sofa is surprisingly comfortable." "Mom!" Ethan's voice carried a note of skepticism. "Your studio is tiny. Where would I put my stuff? Where would we both exist without tripping over each other?" "We could ask Jessie and Raj if you could use your old room for the weekend," Sarah suggested, but even as she said it, she recognized the awkwardness of the proposition. "Yeah, that's not weird at all," Ethan replied sarcastically. "Excuse me. Strangers who are paying a small fortune to rent this house, mind if the former occupant crashes in his old room while you're trying to live your lives?" Sarah sighed. "When you put it that way. Listen, let me figure something out. Maybe Diane would let you stay at her place. Her kids are both at college now." After they hung up, Sarah sat watching the rain, the first real doubt about her decision creeping in. She hadn't fully considered how this arrangement would affect Ethan's sense of home. The house had been his childhood refuge, the place he returned to during college breaks, the constant in his life after the divorce. Now she'd essentially given it away. That afternoon, Sarah crossed the soggy lawn to check the heating system. Jessie met her at the door, apologetic. "I hope we're not bothering you with too many little things," she said, leading Sarah to the basement. "We just want to make sure we're taking proper care of your beautiful home." Sarah smiled reassuringly. "I appreciate that, but truly, you should think of it as your home now. Minor issues like a cabinet that needs WD-40 or a flickering bulb, feel free to just handle those yourselves. I trust your judgment completely." Jessie's relief was visible. "That's good to hear. We've been so careful, almost afraid to live normally, you know. Raj hasn't even cooked anything that might leave lingering smells. Please tell Raj to cook whatever he wants. This house should be lived in, not treated like a museum." The heating issue turned out to be normal expansion sounds from the old radiator system. As Sarah headed back to her studio, Jessie called after her, "Sarah, Raj and I were wondering, would it be okay if we hosted a small dinner party next weekend? Just a few friends from work." "Of course," Sarah replied automatically, then added with emphasis, "It's your home now. You don't need permission to have friends over." Back in her studio, Sarah curled up with a book, but found herself distracted by thoughts of Ethan's visit and the subtle dynamics with her tenants. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof. She'd always loved this sound, but now it highlighted a new worry. Her studio, while charming, wasn't designed for entertaining. Where would she and Ethan eat meals? How would they both function in the mornings with one bathroom? The next day, Sarah drove to a furniture store and invested in a high-quality inflatable mattress and a clever folding table that could serve as both desk extension and dining table. Back at the studio, she reorganized her modest space, creating a plan for Ethan's visit that might actually work. That evening, she noticed the lights blazing in the main house and spotted unfamiliar figures moving about. Curious, she texted Jessie, "Everything okay over there? Saw some extra people." The response came quickly. "Yes. Raj's parents arrived for a surprise visit. They're staying for the week. Hope that's okay." Sarah stared at the message, an unexpected emotion washing over her. Not annoyance, but a strange sense of loss. Strangers were staying in her guest room, using her kitchen to prepare family meals, creating new memories in spaces where she'd created her own. Intellectually, she knew this was exactly what renting out her house meant, but emotionally, it hit differently. She typed back, "Of course it's okay. I hope they enjoy their stay." Over the next few days, Sarah found herself watching the house more than she cared to admit. She observed Raj's mother hanging laundry in the backyard, his father reading the newspaper on the porch swing Sarah had installed after the divorce. They looked comfortable, at ease, as if they'd always belonged there. By Friday, Sarah had made peace with these feelings. She was preparing dinner when a knock came at her studio door, unusual, as both she and her tenants respected the separate spaces arrangement. It was Raj, holding a covered dish. "My mother insisted on bringing you some of her special biryani. She's been cooking up a storm all week." "That's so thoughtful," Sarah said, genuinely touched. "Please thank her for me." Raj hesitated. "Actually, they were hoping to meet you. They're fascinated by this whole setup, you living in the studio while renting out the main house. My mother called it brilliant independence." Sarah laughed. "I'd love to meet them." An hour later, Sarah found herself seated at her former dining table, now adorned with different placemats and candles, enjoying a feast prepared by Raj's mother, Priya. The conversation flowed easily, with Priya peppering Sarah with questions about her architectural work and her decision to downsize. Most people wait until their children are married with their own homes before making such changes, Priya observed. "You are very forward-thinking." "Or just impatient," Sarah joked, accepting another serving of biryani. No, Raj's father, Vikram, interjected. "It's wisdom. Why wait for some arbitrary future date to live the way you want? We stayed in a too-large house for years after our children left, drowning in maintenance and memories. As the evening wound down, Jessie pulled Sarah aside. I hope this wasn't uncomfortable for you, eating in your former dining room with strangers. Sarah considered this. Strangely, it wasn't. It felt right, somehow. Like the house is fulfilling its purpose by being filled with family dinners again, even if it's not my family. Walking back to her studio under a clear night sky, Sarah felt a weight lift. Her house wasn't lost. It was extended. Its walls now contained more stories, more laughter, more life than when it had just been her, rattling around alone. She texted Ethan, "Looking forward to your visit next weekend? And don't worry about space. I've got it all figured out. Plus, I think you'll like meeting our tenants. They're becoming something unexpected. Neighbors." November arrived with a vengeance, bringing bitter winds and the first dusting of snow to the Boston suburbs. Sarah added another layer to her bedding and invested in thick slippers that she wore constantly around the studio. The heating worked perfectly, but the abundance of windows, so glorious during warmer months, created subtle drafts that reminded her she was essentially living in a glass-walled garden pavilion during a New England winter. Remind me again why this seemed like a good idea, she muttered to herself one Friday morning, waiting for her espresso machine to warm up. Through the frost-edged windows, she could see Jessie and Raj leaving for their weekly grocery run, bundled in puffy coats. They waved cheerfully, apparently unbothered by the cold snap. Of course they weren't bothered. They were enjoying the house's robust central heating system that Sarah had upgraded just 2 years ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "On the road. Should be there by 3 p.m. unless traffic is terrible. Need anything?" Sarah glanced around the studio, which she'd spent the previous evening preparing for his first visit since the big move. The inflatable mattress was discreetly tucked behind the sofa, ready to be deployed. She'd cleared half her closet for his things and stocked the small refrigerator with his favorite snacks. Still, anxiety gnawed at her. Would he see her choice as brilliant independence, as Raj's mother had, or as a middle-aged folly he'd have to eventually rescue her from? "Just yourself," she texted back. "Drive safely." The hours crawled by as Sarah attempted to work on a new design project, but found herself repeatedly checking the time and glancing out the window. At 2:30, her concentration was broken by the sound of a car door slamming. Too early to be Ethan. She looked up to see a familiar silver Lexus in the driveway of the main house. Mark. Sarah's stomach dropped. Her ex-husband was standing in the driveway, looking confused as he stared at the unfamiliar cars parked where his used to be. He pulled out his phone, presumably calling Ethan. After a brief conversation, he turned toward the studio, his expression a mixture of bewilderment and annoyance. "Perfect," Sarah muttered, quickly running a hand through her hair and straightening her sweater. She hadn't seen Mark in months. Not since Ethan's graduation, when they'd maintained a carefully choreographed distance from each other. The knock came moments later. Sarah opened the door to find Mark looking dapper as always in his camel hair coat, a weekend bag slung over his shoulder. "Sarah," he said, his tone revealing nothing. "Ethan tells me you've rented out the house, and you're living in your office now?" "Studio," she corrected automatically. "Come in. It's freezing out there." Mark stepped inside, his broad frame immediately making the space feel significantly smaller. He surveyed the converted studio with poorly disguised incredulity. "This is cozy," he finally said, setting his bag down. "Ethan didn't mention you'd become a tiny house enthusiast." Sarah crossed her arms. "What are you doing here, Mark? Ethan didn't mention you were coming this weekend." Mark sighed, removing his coat. "That's because he didn't know. I was supposed to be at a conference in New York, but it was cancelled last minute. I thought I'd surprise him, spend some quality time together. He told me to just come here and wait for him." "Here meaning the house," Sarah said, "which is now rented to a lovely couple named Jessie and Raj." "So, I gathered." Mark sat on the edge of the sofa without being invited. Mind explaining why you're living in what appears to be a garden shed while strangers live in our house? It hasn't been our house for 3 years, Sarah replied evenly. And this garden shed is a beautifully designed accessory dwelling unit that happens to be exactly what I need right now. Before Mark could respond, Sarah's phone rang. Ethan. Hey, honey. Yes, your father is here. No, I'm not killing him. She glanced at Mark. Yet. After hanging up, she turned to her ex-husband. Ethan's about an hour away. Traffic on I-95. An awkward silence settled between them. Mark finally broke it. So, this rental thing, is it financial? Because if you need help... It's not about money, Sarah interrupted, irritation flaring. I'm doing fine financially, thank you. It's about choice. About recognizing I don't need 2,800 square feet for just me. Mark looked skeptical. And living in 400 square feet is the logical alternative. There are these things called apartments, Sarah. Condos. Normal-sized dwellings for single people. I like my land. I like my garden. I like looking out these windows at the woods I've watched change for 15 years. Sarah gestured to the view. And frankly, the rental income is allowing me to build up my retirement savings faster than I ever could have otherwise. Always the practical one, Mark said, his tone softening slightly. I just worry about you out here alone. I'm not alone. I have neighbors 20 yards away. Sarah busied herself making coffee to avoid his gaze. How's Amber? Mark accepted the mug she handed him. She's fine, busy with her yoga studio. Sarah nodded, remembering that his new wife was 12 years younger and entrepreneurial, a yoga instructor who'd opened her own studio in the city, the opposite of Sarah in almost every way. And the baby? She asked, keeping her voice neutral. Growing fast, starting to talk, mostly nonsense, but she thinks she's having full conversations. Another silence, heavier this time. Mark's daughter with Amber was just over a year old now. A half-sister Ethan was still adjusting to having. Listen, Mark said finally, I didn't know you'd rented out the house. Ethan just said to meet him at home, and I assumed... You assumed everything would be exactly as it was when you lived here, Sarah finished for him. That I'd be frozen in time, maintaining your former life like a museum exhibit. Mark looked genuinely taken aback. That's not fair, Sarah. No, what's not fair is showing up unannounced and criticizing my choices. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. 3 years post-divorce, and Mark could still get under her skin faster than anyone. The tension was broken by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Jessie and Raj returning from shopping. Sarah watched through the window as they unloaded grocery bags, laughing about something. Normality just a few yards away, while her past and present collided uncomfortably in her tiny living space. Those are your tenants? Mark asked, following her gaze. Yes, software engineers. They work remotely. Sarah found herself adding, they're taking good care of the house. Mark nodded slowly. So, where is Ethan supposed to stay this weekend? Surely not. He gestured around the studio. We'll manage, Sarah replied stiffly. I have an air mattress. Mark's expression said everything he wasn't voicing. Sarah felt her defenses rising again when her phone buzzed with a text from Jessie. We see an extra car. Is everything okay? Also, we're making chili tonight if you'd like some. Sarah quickly replied, everything fine. My ex-husband is visiting our son this weekend. Thanks for the chili offer. Might take you up on that. You know what? Mark said suddenly. I'll get a hotel room. That way Ethan can stay with you without it being crowded, and you two can have some quality time. Sarah felt a conflicting mix of relief and irritation. That's not necessary. We can make it work. Sarah, Mark said gently, it's a generous offer. Take it. Before she could respond, another car pulled into the driveway. Ethan. They both watched through the window as he emerged, looking between the main house and the studio, with visible hesitation before heading towards Sarah's door. The reunion was a flurry of hugs and overlapping questions. Ethan, to his credit, hid any surprise at finding both his parents in the small studio together. So, he said finally, dropping his backpack, this is cozy. Sarah shot him a warning look. "It's perfect for one person, a bit snug for three, which is why I'm going to grab a hotel room nearby," Mark interjected smoothly. "Maybe we can all have dinner together tomorrow night." Ethan looked between his parents. "Actually, I have an idea. Let me go introduce myself to the tenants, Jessie and Raj, right? Maybe they wouldn't mind if Dad crashed on the couch for one night. Better than a hotel." Before either parent could object, Ethan was out the door, striding confidently toward the main house. "He gets that from you," Sarah said, watching him through the window. "That certainty that everything will work out if you just ask directly." "And the stubbornness is all you," Mark replied with a hint of a smile. 20 minutes later, Ethan returned, looking triumphant. "So, Dad, you're welcome to stay in the guest room tonight. Jessie and Raj are super nice, by the way. They're making chili and invited all of us to join them for dinner." "I couldn't possibly impose," Mark began. "It's settled," Ethan interrupted. "They insist. Said they've been wanting to have a proper dinner with Mom anyway, and this is the perfect opportunity." Sarah met Mark's eyes across the small space, seeing her own discomfort reflected there. "That's very generous of them," she said carefully. "But perhaps your father would prefer the hotel option." "Nonsense," Ethan said cheerfully. "It'll be like old times, except with new people. In the same house, it's not weird at all." That evening, Sarah found herself seated at her former dining table for the second time that month, this time with her ex-husband across from her, their son beside her, and her tenants serving food in what used to be her kitchen. The surreal quality of the situation wasn't lost on any of them, but Jessie and Raj proved to be skilled hosts, keeping the conversation flowing with questions about Ethan's graduate program and Mark's work. "So you're in real estate development?" Raj asked Mark over bowls of surprisingly excellent chili. "That must be fascinating, given Boston's housing market." "It has its moments," Mark replied, "though I focus more on commercial properties these days. Less emotional attachment." Sarah caught his quick glance in her direction and busied herself with her wine glass. "And Sarah, Ethan tells us you're an architectural consultant," Jessie added. "Your studio is beautifully designed. Did you do that yourself?" "I did," Sarah nodded. "It was supposed to be just an office, but it turned out to be adaptable. Like its designer," Mark said unexpectedly, raising his glass slightly in her direction. Sarah always could make the best of changing circumstances. The comment hung in the air, neither compliment nor criticism, but somehow both. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Necessity is the mother of reinvention. As the evening progressed, the initial awkwardness gave way to a strange harmony. Ethan regaled them with stories from his program. Raj shared anecdotes about tech industry absurdities. And even Mark relaxed enough to joke about his daughter's determination to flush his car keys down the toilet. Walking back to her studio later, with promises that Ethan would join her after spending some time catching up with his father, Sarah felt oddly unsettled, not because the evening had gone poorly, but because it had gone surprisingly well. Her past and present had collided, and instead of disaster there had been adaptation. Everyone adjusting to new configurations, new relationships, new boundaries. Inside her studio, Sarah stood at the windows looking back at the illuminated house. Through the dining room window, she could see Mark helping Raj clear the table, while Jessie and Ethan laughed about something in the kitchen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "How's it going with Ethan's visit?" "Studio living still working out?" Sarah typed back. "It's complicated, but maybe that's okay." December transformed Sarah's world into a snow globe. The studio, surrounded by bare trees draped in white, felt like a retreat in the Arctic. The first real snowstorm of the season had dumped nearly 10 inches overnight, and Sarah stood at her windows with a steaming mug of coffee, watching as Raj meticulously cleared the driveway with the snowblower she'd shown him how to use the week before. The past month, since Ethan's visit, had brought subtle shifts in Sarah's relationship with her tenants. The awkward dinner with Mark had somehow broken down invisible barriers, transforming them from careful tenants and cautious landlord into something closer to neighbors with a unique connection. Jessie now regularly texted Sarah with questions about the best local services, everything from hair salons to veterinarians for the kitten they'd recently adopted. Raj occasionally left containers of his experimental cooking on her doorstep, always with a note, "Feedback welcome, but honesty required." Sarah's phone chimed with a calendar reminder, "Holiday party planning, 2 p.m. with Diane." She sighed, setting down her mug. The annual holiday gathering she'd hosted for the past 15 years was approaching, and for the first time she had no idea how to handle it. 20 friends in her 400-square-foot studio seemed impossible, but cancelling the tradition felt like surrendering something precious. As she dressed for her lunch with Diane, Sarah's thoughts drifted to the previous weekend when Ethan had called with unexpected news. "Mom, about Christmas," he'd begun hesitantly. "Dad and Amber invited me to join them at this ski lodge in Vermont. It would be me, them, and Emma. Emma, her ex-husband's toddler daughter, Ethan's half-sister. "You should go," Sarah had said immediately, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "It would be good for you to spend time with your sister. But it's our first Christmas since you moved to the studio. I don't want you to be alone." "I won't be," Sarah had assured him, though she had no specific plans. "Go, build those relationships. We can celebrate before you leave." Now, as she pulled on her boots and coat, Sarah wondered if she'd been too quick to dismiss her own needs. The thought of Christmas morning alone in her studio while Jessie and Raj presumably celebrated with friends in the main house. Her house, with its perfect spot for a tree in the front window where she'd always placed hers, sent a pang through her chest. Diane was already seated at their favorite cafe when Sarah arrived, a pile of shopping bags at her feet. "You look like you've made a significant contribution to the retail economy," Sarah observed, unwinding her scarf. "Teacher gifts," Diane explained, pouring Sarah a cup from the teapot on the table. 3 kids, 3 teachers each, plus assistants and specialists. It's like planning a military operation." They settled into easy conversation, catching up on Diane's children and her husband's recent promotion. Finally, Diane leaned forward. "So, how's tiny house life treating you? Still loving it, or ready to evict the tenants and reclaim your kingdom?" Sarah smiled, appreciating her friend's directness. "Still loving it mostly. But the holidays have me questioning everything. My annual party seems impossible now, and Ethan's spending Christmas with Mark and his new family." Diane's expression softened. "The first holiday season is always the hardest after a big life change. Remember how you felt that first Christmas after the divorce?" Sarah nodded, remembering the hollow feeling that had accompanied the festivities 3 years ago. "I got through it by throwing myself into traditions with Ethan. Now I'm not sure what my traditions are anymore." "Maybe it's time to create new ones," Diane suggested, reaching for a menu. "Or modify the old. What if you still hosted your party but differently?" After lunch, Sarah drove home with a tentative plan taking shape. Instead of dismissing her annual gathering as impossible, perhaps she could reimagine it. The idea grew as she pulled into her driveway, noticing that Jessie and Raj had hung white lights along the porch railings of the main house, tasteful and elegant, different from the multicolored strands Sarah had always used. Later that evening, as Sarah worked at her drafting table, a knock at her door interrupted her concentration. She opened it to find Jessie holding a small potted evergreen tree decorated with tiny ornaments. "We thought you might like a little Christmas spirit in the studio," Jessie explained, handing over the miniature tree. "It's not much, but it can sit on a table without taking up too much space." The gesture was so unexpected and thoughtful that Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "It's perfect, thank you." Jessie shuffled her feet slightly. "There's something else. Raj and I were talking. We're flying to California to visit my parents for Christmas week. The house will be empty." "Oh," Sarah said, processing this information. "Do you need me to keep an eye on things?" "Well, yes, but also—" Jessie looked slightly embarrassed. "We were wondering if you'd like to use the house while we're gone. For Christmas, or if you wanted to have friends over, it seems silly to have it sitting empty when you might need the space. Sarah was momentarily speechless. That's incredibly generous, but I couldn't. Please consider it, Jessie interrupted gently. You've been so accommodating with us, especially when Raj's parents visited, and then with Ethan and his father. We'd feel better knowing the house was being used, rather than sitting empty. After Jessie left, Sarah placed the small tree on her coffee table, its simple white lights casting a warm glow around the studio. The offer to use the house stirred conflicting emotions. Part of her immediately wanted to accept, to temporarily reclaim her space, sleep in her old bedroom, cook in her full-sized kitchen. Another part recognized that might be a step backward in her journey to redefine her life. The next morning, Sarah woke to another few inches of snow and a text from Ethan. Confirmed Christmas plans with Dad. Can I come by next weekend to exchange gifts with you? Of course, she typed back, looking forward to it. Wrapping herself in a thick cardigan, Sarah made coffee and contemplated her options. The deadline for invitations to her holiday gathering was approaching if she planned to hold it at all. Jessie and Raj's offer to use the main house seemed like the perfect solution, yet something held her back. Her contemplation was interrupted by another text, this time from Mark. Need to pick up some old financial documents from the house filing cabinet. Is there a good time this week? Sarah stared at the message. The filing cabinet in question was in the basement of the main house, still holding years of their joint financial records that neither had bothered to fully separate after the divorce. I'll need to check with the tenants, she replied. They've offered me use of the house while they're away for Christmas. Perhaps that would be a good time for you to look for what you need. Mark's response came quickly. They're letting you use the house? Isn't it technically still your house? The comment irritated her. They're being thoughtful, and yes, I own it, but they rent it. Their space, their choice to offer. Later that day, Sarah found herself knocking on the door of the main house. Raj answered, wearing an apron dusted with flour. Sarah, perfect timing. I'm experimenting with sourdough. Come in, come in. The house smelled of baking bread and pine from the Christmas tree they'd set up in the front window, exactly where Sarah had always placed hers, though theirs was decorated with a collection of handmade ornaments rather than her color-coordinated glass balls. I wanted to talk to you both about your generous offer, Sarah began, as Jessie joined them from the home office that had once been Ethan's room. And also, my ex-husband needs to retrieve some documents from the basement filing cabinet. I was thinking he could do that while you're away, if that's all right. Of course, Raj said, checking his bread through the oven window. Our home is your home. Literally, he grinned. About that, Sarah continued, choosing her words carefully. I've been thinking about your offer to use the house while you're gone. It's incredibly kind, but I've decided to host my holiday gathering at a restaurant this year instead. Jessie looked surprised. Are you sure? We really don't mind. I'm sure, Sarah nodded. This whole experience has been about moving forward, creating a new chapter. Going back, even temporarily, feels like it might muddy the waters. On her way out, Sarah paused in the entryway, noticing a framed photo on the wall she hadn't seen before. Jessie and Raj on their wedding day, laughing as they fed each other cake. Beside it was a candid shot of them in front of the house on moving day, holding a set of keys with excited expressions. They were creating their own history here, just as she had done. Back in her studio, Sarah made a decision. She sent a group text to her usual holiday party guests. Annual celebration is still on. This year, join me for a winter solstice gathering at my studio, Wednesday, December 21st, 6 p.m. Dress warmly for an outdoor fire pit, followed by dinner at Bella's. Limited space means intimate conversation. RSVP essential. The responses came quickly, mostly enthusiastic acceptances, with a few questions about the change in format. By evening, Sarah had confirmed 8 guests, a perfect number for her studio's capacity. The following weekend, Ethan arrived bearing gifts and a bottle of Sarah's favorite wine. So, he said, looking around the studio appraisingly, You're really doing this. Tiny house Christmas and all. Sarah unwrapped the simple string lights she'd purchased to decorate the small deck outside her studio. I'm really doing this, she confirmed. Different doesn't mean worse. They spent the afternoon exchanging early Christmas gifts, practical items for Sarah's compact living space, and books Ethan needed for next semester. As dusk fell, they hung the lights around the deck railings, and Sarah lit the new fire pit she'd purchased. "Mom," Ethan said as they sat watching the flames, bundled in blankets with mugs of mulled wine, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest." Sarah tensed slightly. "Always. Are you really happy like this? Or is this whole tiny house thing some kind of, reaction to Dad moving on with his life?" The question stung, but Sarah recognized the genuine concern behind it. "It's a fair question," she said finally. "And maybe at first there was an element of that, but it's evolved into something else entirely." She gestured to the studio behind them, warm light spilling from its windows. "This space feels more authentically mine than the house ever did after you left for college. It's forced me to identify what truly matters to me, what I actually need, versus what I accumulated out of habit or expectation." Ethan nodded slowly. "And what about holidays? Special occasions? Where do those fit in a space this small?" "I'm figuring that out," Sarah admitted. "I'm hosting a scaled-down solstice party next week. 8 friends instead of 20. Fire pit out here, then dinner at a restaurant. Different, but maybe better in some ways. And Christmas Day, when I'm with Dad and—" Ethan trailed off, still uncomfortable mentioning his half-sister directly. "Diane invited me to join her family," Sarah said, "but I'm considering a different option. The Art Retreat Center in the Berkshires is hosting a 3-day workshop over Christmas, pottery and meditation, a chance to create something new while reflecting on the year." Ethan studied her face. "That actually sounds perfect for you." After Ethan left the next day, Sarah sat at her desk, watching the snow begin to fall again. She told him the truth. This space had become more than just a reaction to Mark's new life or a solution to an empty nest. It had become a catalyst for reevaluating everything she'd taken for granted. On the solstice evening, Sarah's deck glowed with light from paper lanterns and the crackling fire pit. Her 8 closest friends, huddled in winter coats, passing thermoses of hot cocoa spiked with peppermint schnapps. Inside, the studio had been transformed with evergreen boughs and candlelight. The small tree from Jessie and Raj, now adorned with tiny wooden ornaments Sarah had carved herself over the past week. "This is magical," her friend Louise declared, warming her hands by the fire. "So much more intimate than those big parties where you barely get to talk to anyone." "I thought I'd miss the big tree and the fancy appetizer spread," Sarah admitted. "But this feels right, stripped down to what matters. Good friends, conversation, warmth in the cold." Diane nudged her gently. "So the studio experiment is officially a success." Sarah looked around at her friends' faces illuminated by firelight, at the cozy studio behind them, at the main house where Jessie and Raj were hosting their own gathering before their holiday travels. The 2 spaces existing in harmony, serving different needs, housing different phases of life. "It's a success," she confirmed, "not despite the challenges, but because of them. Having less space has somehow created more room in my life for new relationships, new traditions, new ways of seeing myself." Later that night, after her friends had departed and she'd extinguished the fire, Sarah stood in the silent snowfall, looking between her 2 homes, the larger one she'd shared and the smaller one she'd claimed. For the first time since the divorce, perhaps even before it, she felt not just acceptance of her circumstances, but a genuine appreciation for them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Hope the party was great. Miss you. Saved you a spot on the slopes for New Year's if you change your mind about joining us in Vermont." Sarah smiled, typing back, "Party was perfect. Different, but perfect. Enjoy Christmas with your dad and sister. I found my own adventure." As she readied for bed, Sarah noticed a card she'd missed earlier, tucked under the small tree. Inside was a handwritten note from Jessie and Raj. Wishing you joy in your beautiful sanctuary. Thank you for sharing your home so we could find ours. Merry Christmas." Sarah placed the card on her nightstand, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. What had begun as her son's casual suggestion to rent a room had evolved into something far more profound, a reclaiming of space, identity, and possibility that extended well beyond the physical dimensions of her living arrangement. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing both her homes in quiet transformation. Spring arrived suddenly in New England, as it often does. One day the trees were bare, and the next, pale green buds appeared overnight. Sarah sat on her deck, now freed from winter's grip, sipping her morning coffee and watching a pair of cardinals flit between the newly leafed maples. Her studio doors stood open to the mild April breeze, carrying the scent of damp earth and possibility. Almost a year had passed since Ethan's graduation, since his casual suggestion that she rent out a room. In that time, Sarah had reimagined not just her living space, but her entire concept of home, family, and belonging. Her phone chimed with a text from Jessie. "Garden center run tomorrow? Those raised beds aren't going to plant themselves." Sarah smiled, typing back an enthusiastic yes. The latest evolution in her unconventional landlord-tenant relationship had been a shared vegetable garden project. When Sarah had mentioned her annual tradition of planting tomatoes and herbs, Jessie had suggested combining efforts in the sunny spot behind the garage. Now they had plans for an ambitious garden that would supply both households. The doorbell rang, unusual for a Saturday morning. Sarah crossed the studio to find Ethan standing there, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a tired smile on his face. "Surprise," he said, dropping the bag and enveloping her in a hug. "The department gave us an unexpected long weekend, so I thought I'd come home." Sarah ushered him inside, noting the shadows under his eyes and the slight slump of his shoulders. "You look exhausted. Rough semester." "The roughest," Ethan confirmed, collapsing onto the sofa. "Professor Harrington has us rewriting our theses for the third time. I needed to escape the library before I started living there permanently." Sarah busied herself making a fresh pot of coffee. "Well, I'm glad you're here, though I should warn you, the studio's guest accommodations haven't improved since your last visit." Ethan glanced at the inflatable mattress still tucked discreetly behind the sofa. "Actually, I already spoke to Jessie. They said I could crash in my old room for the weekend. Hope that's okay." A year ago, this arrangement might have bothered Sarah, her son staying in what used to be their home while she remained in the studio. Now it simply felt practical. "Of course it's okay. How did you know they'd be here? They could have been traveling." "I texted Raj earlier this week," Ethan admitted. "We've been in touch occasionally since Christmas." This was news to Sarah. "You and Raj? About what?" Ethan looked slightly embarrassed. "He's been helping me with some coding issues for my research project. One thing led to another, and we started talking regularly. He and Jessie are good people, Mum." "They are," Sarah agreed, handing him a mug of coffee. "I got lucky with them." They spent the morning catching up, Ethan detailing the challenges of his program, Sarah sharing updates on her latest architectural projects. After lunch, they walked through the neighborhood, enjoying the spring blossoms and mild weather. "So," Ethan said, as they circled back toward home, "I have news I wanted to share in person." Something in his tone made Sarah pause. "Good news or bad news?" "Good, I think." He took a deep breath. "I've been offered a research position for the summer. It's at MIT, working with Professor Lazarus on a project that aligns perfectly with my thesis." "Ethan, that's wonderful," Sarah beamed. "MIT is incredibly prestigious and so close to home." "That's the thing," Ethan continued. "I'd need housing from June through August. Cambridge rents are insane, especially for short-term stays, and the stipend isn't huge." Sarah immediately understood where this was heading. "You want to stay in your old room for the summer." "I've already talked to Jessie and Raj," Ethan admitted. "They said they'd be open to a short-term sublet arrangement if you approve. I'd pay them rent, of course." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this development. Her son would be living in her house, but not with her, paying rent to her tenants. The scenario would have seemed absurd a year ago. "Mom," Ethan prompted, "I know it's weird. If it makes you uncomfortable—" "It's not that," Sarah interrupted. "I'm just appreciating the irony. This all started because you suggested I rent out a room, and now you're the one renting the room." That evening, Sarah invited Jessie and Raj to join them for dinner at her favorite local restaurant to celebrate Ethan's news. As they sat around the table sharing a bottle of wine, Sarah marveled at how natural it felt, this unconventional family they'd created. "We're excited to have you for the summer," Jessie was telling Ethan. "Though fair warning, Raj stress bakes during project deadlines. You'll gain 15 pounds from his midnight muffins." "A risk I'm willing to take," Ethan laughed. "And I promise to be the model tenant. Mom raised me right." Sarah smiled, watching the easy rapport between them. "Just remember whose house it actually is when you're all ganging up on me," she joked. "Speaking of which," Raj said, suddenly serious, "Sarah, there's something we wanted to discuss with you." Sarah felt a flicker of concern. "Is everything all right with the house?" "Everything's perfect," Jessie assured her. "It's just our lease is up in August. And we've been talking," Raj continued, "about buying a place of our own. We've loved living in your house. It's been the perfect first home together. But we're thinking it might be time for something that's truly ours." Sarah nodded, surprised by the pang of sadness she felt. "I completely understand. You should have your own place to make your own history in." "We'd want to give you plenty of notice," Jessie added. "And of course, we'll work around Ethan's summer stay." Later that night, after everyone had gone their separate ways, Ethan to his old bedroom in the main house, Jessie and Raj to their evening routine, Sarah sat alone on her deck under a canopy of stars. The news of her tenant's eventual departure stirred complicated emotions. Pride in their next step, gratitude for the year they'd shared, uncertainty about what would come next. Would she find new tenants? Move back into the main house? Sell the property entirely and start fresh somewhere else? For the first time in months, the future felt wide open again. The following morning, Sarah woke early. She made her coffee and carried it outside, settling into what had become her favorite spot on the deck. From here, she could see both her homes, the larger one where her son now slept in his childhood room, temporarily returned to her orbit, and the smaller one that had taught her how little she actually needed to feel content. Her phone lit up with a text from Diane. "Brunch today? The usual spot?" As Sarah typed her reply, she noticed the date on her phone's display, exactly 1 year since Ethan's graduation, since he'd casually suggested she rent out a room. She couldn't have imagined then where that simple idea would lead. To renovations and reinventions, to new relationships and redefined boundaries, to a deeper understanding of what home truly meant. A movement caught her eye. Ethan, emerging from the main house, stretching in the morning sunlight. He spotted her and waved, then headed toward the studio. "Morning," he called as he approached. "Coffee smells amazing." "Help yourself," Sarah replied, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Plenty left in the pot." Ethan returned moments later with a steaming mug and dropped into the chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day brighten around them. "You know," Ethan said finally, "when I suggested you rent out a room last year, I never imagined all this." He gestured to the studio, to the main house beyond. "I just didn't want you to be lonely." "I know," Sarah smiled, "but you sparked something bigger than either of us realized. You helped me see possibilities I might never have considered on my own. And now, with Jessie and Raj leaving eventually, what happens next?" Sarah took a deep breath of the spring air, feeling its potential. "I don't know yet, but I'm not afraid to find out." Ethan studied her face. "You've changed, Mom, in a good way." "We all have," she replied. "That's the point, isn't it? To keep growing, keep adapting." She raised her mug in a small toast. "To unexpected journeys. And to taking the best part," Ethan added with a grin, "whatever that turns out to be." As they clinked mugs, Sarah looked between her two homes, one large, one small, one from her past, one representing her present. Both had shaped her, taught her, held her through different seasons of life. Whatever came next, new tenants, a return to the main house, or some option she hadn't yet conceived, she knew the lessons of this year would remain. Home wasn't just about physical space, but about the courage to claim exactly what you need, even when that means reimagining everything. The circle had completed itself, with Ethan's suggestion now bringing him back to the very home he'd encouraged her to share. Yet nothing was the same. They had all been transformed by the journey between then and now. Sarah smiled, breathing in the promise of spring, of renewal, of possibilities still unfolding. The best part, she agreed softly, is yet to come.